Greens leader Adam Bandt joins me now for more on this. It's big spending. There's a big focus on services, welfare as well. There must be a fair bit about this that you agree on.
Well, at the moment, it looks like they're going to continue the trickle-down approach of previous budgets, spending a lot, but giving it to the billionaires and big corporations in the hope that some of it will trickle down to benefit people, because we know that approach doesn't work, but that it's an approach the government loves because it takes donations from the billionaires and the big corporations. We've got two big crises in this country that we're facing. We've got an inequality crisis and a climate crisis, both of which got worse during the pandemic. The budget's an opportunity to tackle those, but it looks like it won't. It looks like the inequality crisis will continue to get worse and people will still be living in poverty after this budget, job seekers included. And it looks like, as far as the climate crisis is concerned, that the government's actually going to give public money to new coal and gas developments in the middle of a climate emergency.
So you mentioned there are people out there looking for a job. We understand there'll be money for people wanting to train up and get skills. The other big moving part is JobKeeper. There was a warning from Labor and the Greens about this ending. It doesn't seem to have had the impact you thought it would. Is that fair to say?
Well, what we do know is that 60% of the jobs that are coming back after the pandemic are casual and insecure jobs. And so the way that the employment statistics work in this country is if you work for an hour a week, you're counted as unemployed. Now, the Treasurer will trumpet those stats tonight, but you scratch that and scratch the surface, and you find that there are a lot of people who are still stuck in insecure work, and there are an increasing number of those jobs coming back now.
Is underemployment higher now than pre-pandemic?
Well, we'll get a better sense when we have a look at the labour force figures that are coming out, but we know that about the jobs that are coming back. We know that pre-pandemic underemployment was such that 1 in 3 young people in this country either didn't have a job or didn't have enough hours of work, and those figures don't look like they're getting better. And again, this shows what's wrong with the government's approach. Instead of taking money and investing in nation-building, planet-saving projects that would create decent jobs and help drive wages up, they're giving the money, including JobKeeper payments, to big corporations that didn't need it, hoping it trickles down. And what you see is a lot of casual and insecure jobs.
I want to get more on the JobKeeper in a moment, but just on this key figure, because unemployment, that sort of data that you say isn't the best one to use, that's better than expected. Everyone agrees on that. You're saying underemployment is worse, than pre-pandemic?
It's still high. It's still very high.
How does it compare to pre-pandemic?
I don't know the immediate stats at the moment. I have to look at the latest labour force figures that come out. But if
that's your key argument, shouldn't that be your focus and you'd know where it was?
Well, 60% of the jobs that are coming back are insecure.
How many of them were lost, though, that were the casual?
Well, a substantial amount, especially given that the government didn't extend JobKeeper to people who are on casual employment. And again, this is the point. It's an opportunity to tackle the inequality crisis, and that would involve creating decent, secure jobs.
But just what you said there,
is not doing that.
Because JobKeeper didn't support those casual jobs, they're the ones that come back. So there's not actually anything unusual about those jobs being the one that come back.
Even if we're where we were before, we have an underemployment crisis in this country. When 1 in 3 young people either doesn't have a job or doesn't have enough hours of work, that is a crisis level. Now, it's not enough to trumpet that we might be back somewhere close to where we were before.
Yeah.
When you add underemployment and unemployment together, we are still in strife.
I understand that you're still saying you don't like the situation and you think underemployment is still too high, but it's important to say, right, as you just said,
yes,
because you don't have support for casuals through JobKeeper, they're going to be the jobs that come back. That actually makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, potentially, but the industries that were hardest hit during the COVID crisis, including in our area of Melbourne, still aren't back on their feet. So take areas like hospitality, where you'd have a higher number of those casual works. They're still not back on their feet yet. And that's what we're warning about the early pulling of JobKeeper in particular. And it's still going to be a while before they're back. And this is the point. As we recover from the crisis and from the recession and we deal with the inequality crisis, what kind of jobs are we going to create? Now, at the moment, the government's approach is not what we say it should be, which is to directly invest in big government-led projects. Things like getting dental into Medicare or getting us to 700% renewable energy or building 1 million new public housing homes. They're the kind of things that would tackle the inequality crisis and create decent jobs. They're not doing that, which is why we're seeing this growth in insecurity.
You want major companies to pay back JobKeeper. Which ones would qualify under this?
Large companies that have got turnover of over $50 million who received JobKeeper, but during the pandemic have also managed to post a profit or
Any
issue
profit.
dividends or
Any
pay
profit.
executive bonuses, they should pay it back.
Any
up to the
company
amount
that
of
made
their
a profit.
Up to the amount of their profit. Okay, so
If their profit during the pandemic halved, even with JobKeeper, why should they pay money back? They're worse
because it
off.
was meant to be a lifeline. Okay, now if companies, because you shouldn't be making, companies shouldn't be, and billionaires should not be making profits big enough to buy, in the case of some of them, buy private jets and pay executive bonuses. They shouldn't be doing that off the back of
Let's
public
remember
handouts.
what JobKeeper was. It was actually a salary subsidy. So no company could take the money directly. A lot of these companies would have kept people on only because of the salary subsidy. Otherwise, they would have sacked workers. And now if they made so much as $1 profit, they hand it back.
Well, they would pay back $1 if they made $1 profit.
Sure,
We
but
say
if a
they should
company had a
pay $1
$50
back.
million profit, kept on workers above what it normally would in tough
But let's-
times. Hang on, let me play out the hypothetical, and then made 25 million in profit. They've got to hand back if they got JobKeeper 25 million. How is that fair?
But let's look at the reality of what actually happened. You had companies like Harvey Norman that took $20 million in JobKeeper and then doubled their profits to several $100 million. Now, they could pay back the $20 million. Like this is, you look at Seven West Media, run by a billionaire.
Yeah.
They increased their profits, and then they took $50-odd million in JobKeeper, if memory serves correctly. Stand to be corrected on that. But then went off and bought a $90
you put forward those
million
examples, but your
project.
proposal for
That's
this...
actually what has happened.
Sure, and that's fair enough.
Yeah.
But your proposal would be any company that made any profit. So even if a company's profits halved during a pandemic and they kept employing people because the government said, here's some money, and they get demanded to pay it
But those
back.
profits are being made off the back of public subsidies. We're talking about large corporations that have turnover of over $50 million. This was meant to be a lifeline. It wasn't meant to be, it wasn't Profit Keeper, it was Job Keeper. So it was meant to be about keeping
But it was
people
also
employed
handed out as...
during a time that people were doing it
to
tough.
make sure workers stayed attached to the company. So
And it
there would
did
be
its job.
companies out there, would you concede, that kept people on because they knew they were getting the subsidy, otherwise in tough times would have sacked people.
Well, so it did its job. So people stayed on, and that's good. But we're saying that if you come through this with massive, with still profitability on the other side, then you should pay some of it back. I think that's fair.
You don't see, though, the difficulty with a company that had half of its profit. So it went a lot worse during COVID, still having to pay back JobKeeper.
Well, no, because they were still profitable off the back of public handouts.
But that's like saying any profit is
off
bad.
the back of public handouts, then you should pay it back.
But there's
it's not saying
there's
any
no
profit's
definitive
bad. It's
link. You're
people
saying
who
profit
made-
from public handouts. Those handouts were to pay wages. That's what they were for. If a company then made half as much profit as it normally does, that's not necessarily because of JobKeeper. You're drawing the link.
But it is because they were able to be in that profitable situation because they received significant.
But they might
handouts.
not have
Otherwise,
kept the
they might not
workers
be
on in that situation.
But
they
can't we
might
have both. We've kept the workers on, and so now if it turns out on the other side, perhaps you didn't need quite so much because you were still profitable or relatively profitable, then you can pay it back. We're talking about big corporations here that receive significant amounts of
big
public
corporations are big hirers, big employers as well. The other problem with doing this is next time round when there's a scheme like this, companies will say, we might have to hand this back. We're not going to use your program.
Well,
no thanks.
I would hope next time around the government might design the scheme a bit better so that you say if you're going to take it then and rely on public support, then that's great. But during this period, while you're relying on that, then it's not the time to go and buy a
But if you make
jet.
any profit at all...
We can have a partial contribution back. I think that's fair.
And just finally, billionaires tax as well. How would that work? Is it just net worth?
6% on billionaires' worth.
But are you a
$1
billionaire
billion.
according to your net worth?
You are a billionaire according to your total worth. We'd give the tax office the power to assess people's worth, including looking at all of their assets that they hold here in Australia, and then say 6% on that. In the context where billionaires during the pandemic increased their wealth by 30%, that is a fair amount. And
you're going to get
Australia's mining
billionaires.
Billionaires doubled their wealth.
You're going to get billionaires suddenly based overseas, aren't you?
Well, I don't think so. When you're talking about mining wealth and resources that are basically based here, the minerals are in the ground here. I don't think they're going to move overseas. The minerals are still in the ground.
But they will be based there for tax.
Well, why is it that every time we talk about making billionaires pay their fair share, they threaten to go somewhere else? I don't think that's a fair approach.
Just finally, you mentioned fossil fuels being subsidised. Have we heard that in concrete? Is this you reading the tea leaves, or?
Well, there's at least about $10 billion a year in fossil fuel subsidies coming in at the moment. We know that. We help at the moment the likes of Clive Palmer and Gina Reinhart buy cheap petrol. We know that costs the budget. That's money that should be going into...
So you're not talking about new subsidies, it's what...
No, we are talking about new subsidies because we've got the government at the moment out there saying that they want to expand the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund to allow public money to go into coal and gas. Now, in the middle of a climate crisis, we should, and there will be provision for that in the budget. So in the middle of a climate crisis, we should not be taking public money to put into coal and gas.
Greens leader Adam Bandt, appreciate your time today.
Thanks.